But, you know, an example. So here's something, if you're predisposed to it or not, try and identify, as I was showing earlier, you know, the people that I see as examples of scientists that I say, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be like those guys. Motivators, you know, read stuff on motivation, you know, like, remember garbage in, garbage out, right? So try and put good things in when you're reading as well, motivational stuff. Read about people who are success in academics or success in business, and these people, because it'll encourage you, right? And also, I believe, at certain points in time when you feel fatigued in your dissertation, put it aside, right? Go and do something. I always have the outlet of martial arts, get the blood going, if you do yoga or you do biking or you do walking or whatever, have a physical routine as well at the same time, okay? Please consult your doctor before engaging in any physical activity. Okay? But, you know, we've all had the experience where we're working and nothing's happening, and then, you know, you get up, you go for a 2-mile walk around your community, right? A couple of blocks around your house, get some fresh air, you come down, you sit down again, and it's like night and day, right? Or go see a movie or something like that. Another trick is the self-reward system, where you say, okay, I've got to finish off chapter 2. When chapter 2 finishes off, I'm going to go see the new Superman movie, right? But I'm not going to go see the new Superman movie until I finish chapter 2. So little tricks we play with ourselves, but they actually do work. You know, that's the funny thing, right? And a lot of these you do get exposed to these tricks in the time management course if you do take one, because they talk about it as well. We're gonna break in about 15 minutes for coffee and that. But, the essential purpose of the doctoral program is to get you to a successful conclusion of the defense and the awarding of the doctoral degree. Right? What did I say over and over so far? It's a project. It's not an opus. It's not you're not Professor von Mises writing human action, right? He writes human action. He's trying to explain everything about human action. Well, that's a big topic, right? That's going to take you a while. You're going to be sitting in the library for a long time. What you're doing is a dissertation. You're answering your one question through your thesis, right? It's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and it's got an end, right? And so the dissertation is a project. Treat it like a project, right? Time management, project management. It's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and it has an end. Right? Know where you are on that spectrum at all times, and understand or have a good feeling as to the rate of progress that you're making. Okay? And always be projecting out your finishing date as you're working, right? Okay, question. Yep.
Yeah, I noticed that you've been using the word dissertation and thesis intentionally, so I just want to understand, you know.
Thesis is the actual argument that's within the dissertation. The thesis is the argumentation that you're putting forward. The dissertation is more like actually the product.
The end product.
Yeah, the dissertation is like the thing itself. The thesis.
So when you are writing, just like you're writing the thesis, like you are presenting the dissertation.
Correct. Yeah. You're also presenting your thesis, but you're presenting your thesis. Your thesis, for instance, is when you're in the defense. You're not presenting your dissertation, right? The defense is you're presenting the thesis that you've worked on. What's your argumentation? What's your research question? How did you argue it through? What's your conclusion in that? The dissertation itself is actually the physical thing, the physical document that's handed in, right? Now, it gets confusing because at a master's level as well, they say dissertation, which it never is. Okay, it's usually a thesis, or sometimes it's actually just a report. When I was at the last institution that I was working at, even at an undergraduate level, at their end of study project, they were calling it the student's dissertation, right? And the students were walking around as, I finished my dissertation, it's 27 pages long. And I was like, you know, this is doing a real disservice to the students, right? Because they're getting a false understanding of what they're doing. And so, you know, yeah, you can casually use the terms interchangeably, but when it's the doctoral study, it's a dissertation that you're writing. The thesis is what you're arguing, okay? You're asking me all these trick questions, you know. And in the bottom here, thing I mentioned before, again, you're lucky if, say, a handful of people read the thesis. Of course, we read it, but when you start talking about your own people in your immediate environment, like your family and friends, they don't want to sit around and read a 300-page thesis, right? They'll look at it and they'll say, oh, that's very good, congratulations, and stuff. And sometimes it hurts a little bit because you've put so much time into it, and you know, you want your significant other or the sibling that's closest to you to really understand what you did over 3 years, and then they take a cursory interest in it, right? You know, that's just life, right?
At least they can read the overview.
Pardon?
They can at least read the overview or the introduction.
Yeah, they'll read your conclusion, the last paragraph of your conclusion. Or they'll read the part where you dedicated it to them. When your mother reads it and says, oh, that's so nice you mentioned me in the application. Research proposal, now this is my slideshow from last year, and the research proposal has changed, right? So we went from the 25-page proposal down to a more concise document that seems to be serving us well, but some of the lessons are the same. And these are true as well for the thesis itself, the first 3 chapters of the dissertation, right? You know, what is it? It's a work plan, it's justification for the research, it's a demonstration of aptitude, a demonstration of doability, it's partial, in this case, the first 3 chapters of the dissertation would be the dissertation, but a research proposal is also a partial part of the dissertation. Now understand that there's no standard research proposal that exists out there in the world that you download off the web and every school uses it, right? All universities have different standards, they have different things that they want to see in a research proposal, but there are some general things that it tries to get across. You know, budgeting, scheduling, the basic argument of what's happening, who are the main authors that are existing, the main frameworks that exist for what you're studying, and what your approach is going to be, and what you're expecting your originality to be in your research, okay? Definitions is that it's a proposal of integrated chain of reasoning that makes strong logical connections between problem statement and coherent plan of action you are proposing to undertake, okay? And I have to put a caveat in here, this is actually a quote out of one of our textbooks, and I don't have the reference here, so please excuse me on that. I just realized it didn't show up, so I'll have to include that. But originality, you know, what are you proposing in your research? So this should also be coming out in your first chapter when you're writing the dissertation, right? You're doing something completely new. You're taking an existing study and applying it to a new geography, applying it to different subjects or cultures, like we were talking earlier today. You're doing a meta-study. Does anybody know what a meta-study is? You're a sociologist, aren't you?
Where are you?
Creating a meta-study. Do you know what a meta-study is?
Maybe an original study?
Close, but a meta-study is a study that collates a lot of results from many, many studies on the same topic and tries to bring them together for more generalized results. So what could happen is, especially in the medical industry, they do this a lot, is a lot of people might have studied, some effect on diabetes or whatever, right? And so instead of relying on a few examples, they take all the studies and they put them into a generalized format, and then they're able to pull out all those results together. Okay.
we did something like that when we were doing climate change.
Yeah,
We did climate change, and then we brought in a lot of experts from all over the world.
yeah,
And they made presentations of the works and what is going on
yeah.
within their regions and put it together as one study.
There you
Yes,
go.
that's
That would
it.
be That would be
That's
another
it.
study,
Right.
yeah.
So can we consider the literature review as a meta review?
Yeah, to a certain extent, I think that's not a bad definition. I mean, what I would say is that's probably more applicable to an interdisciplinary thesis where you have, literature review on different domains, say 3 different domains, and you're triangulating between these domains, the literature, a little bit more, but yeah.
Another take on that meta study is to take an existing large one, and you're looking for something else out of it than what was originally intended in it. Example, inoculation rates in sub-Saharan Africa. As a sociologist, you might say, they did that study, but let me take a closer look at the socioeconomic levels of people who were inoculated. So the original study wasn't intended for that, but you take that data and you use it for something else. As Dr. Henderson was saying, many times in the medical community, and that's where the controversy comes in, well, we noticed that there was this rate of something from this group. And someone will say, but the original intent was breast cancer, and you're finding out about diabetes rates, because gathering that data would be too difficult to replicate again. And it really speaks to point 2 here too, an existing
Yes.
study, and we're going to take it and apply it to something else. What he's talking about is you don't have to recreate everything. We saw a little bit of that yesterday where the data was there, he took it and applied it in a little bit different ways that was never intended.
Creating an interdisciplinary study, we just mentioned it quickly, but interdisciplinary means you might be interested in corporate social responsibility. You might be interested in finance, right? And you might be interested in, what's the third one that could possibly go with that? Economics, something in the economics domain. What were you gonna say? Philosophy or whatever, right? So you have 3 very different areas, but what you're going to do is you're going to combine those 3 areas because you see a unique link between those 3 areas for your research question, okay? So where you wouldn't necessarily go out and say, well, who else has combined those 3 groups like I have? Okay, nobody's done it. There's the uniqueness. An interdisciplinary study, I'll warn you up front, is more challenging because you have to be up to speed on 3 domains, or at least 2, right? So you need at least 2 different ones, right? But if you do 3, usually more than 3 is too much, you can't handle it, right? So it's either 2 or 3. You have to really be up to speed. You can't just be, as we say, ankle depth knowledge in the 3, right? You have to be shoulder depth on all 3. And then you have to be able to speak really well. So when I think of this, I think of some of the economists that you listen to that are not just economists, but then they become social philosophers, right? And they use their basis in economics to start talking about political economy and then social issues, right? And then they move to some other issues. So they have become, interdisciplinary in their approach to problems, but that takes real skill in multiple areas. But for me, that's what a doctoral, that's what a philosopher is. Somebody who, and that's what Dr. Eger was talking about, connecting the metadots. He meant that, okay, start from a solid core. What are you strong at? Okay, maybe it's economics, maybe it's finance, maybe it's whatever. Okay, what are the other disciplines in business that you can now leapfrog to? And then from there, outside of business, right? Once you're at a doctoral level, right? That's why all the different faculties in the university, it's all Doctor of Philosophy, right? So you get to Doctor of Philosophy in business, that doesn't mean you can't start bringing in history. And one of the one of the important domains or new domains in business is business history, the history of business, right? It's one of the newer domains, and it's a very interesting domain, you know, and it connects to corporate social responsibility as well, because the history of business and how it came about and why it came about and why we give businesses the right to operate within society is a historical issue as well.
I was just thinking about terminology for corporate social responsibility. What is the other terminology?
Pardon?
The terminology for corporate social responsibility. I think there is another terminology for that.
Oh yeah, there's actually like 15 different terms. There's well, there's governments, there's corporate citizenship, there's sustainability, there's just social responsibility people talk about. There's the people within the field call themselves simians, which means if I can remember what it means exactly, social issues and management.
So we shouldn't just zero in on corporate, because that's corporate social responsibility. There must be some terminology to embrace all these responsibilities.
Chip, well, it's actually interesting what you're saying, because this is in my thesis at the time, say 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Yeah, which was
By the book.
It's yeah, buy the book, please. It's pre-paradigmatic, right? There was no definition for it. So what I was saying, and what was happening in the general area was the word sustainability was taking over, right? But sustainability has now become a word sort of like strategic, right? 15 years ago in business studies, everything was strategic this, strategic that. Sustainability is now like that. So my umbrella term, or the term that I identified as the most appropriate umbrella term, was corporate citizenship. And taking from political sphere of citizenship. Don't be a consumer, be a citizen, right? Being a consumer is just something you do. Being a citizen is something that you are, right? So corporate citizenship breaks into all these different things of sustainability, ethics, corporate social responsibility. Now the term itself, corporate social responsibility, one thing that you guys should be doing in your thesis is don't just accept terms from the domain that you're studying just willy-nilly and just say, okay, well, people are using that term, therefore it must be a proper term. Like I questioned corporate social responsibility. Well, corporations are not responsible. Individuals are responsible. So the term corporate social responsibility is just a play on words, right? So it's individual responsibility in the corporate realm. That's what we're talking about.
Is that why it is now called shared values? Shared values.
Shared values, yeah, absolutely, right? But sometimes, especially in business, Professor Mintzberg from McGill, one of his pet peeves is the word human resources, right? And the reason why he says he hates that term, I might be putting words in his mouth by saying hate, but he dislikes that term, is because as soon as you call it a human resource, a resource takes the personality out of it, right? And a resource you can move around sort of like furniture and other assets, right? And you don't have to worry about the implications of it so much. But as soon as you start talking about people who have actual names, well, then it's a different story, right? And one of his criticisms in the recent times, when businesses get into trouble, they're so quick to release people out of the companies because this human resource mentality and negating the effect that it has on the people who are being released or fired, right? And so we play games with ourselves psychologically to change the names of things so that we could deal with them better, okay? So when you're in your thesis and you're reading other articles and reading other authors, and they're using terms, question those terms as to whether or not those are the best terms. This is what philosophers do all the time, right? Dr. Mataras was pointing this out to me. Philosophers always question the terms and the language being used because the language tells you what the mindset is behind, right? And we tend to take things on. Have you ever questioned your like given name? Right? Have you ever said, why am I called Jeffrey? Why did my parents call me Jeffrey? What has the name Jeffrey cause other people, how do other people view me, because my name is Jeffrey, right, as opposed to it being Greg, or being some other name, you know, Wilson, or whatever, you know. So what we call things, you know, already defines the one, right? So what we use terms in business, when we give it a term, it's not just that we're naming it, we're also giving the definition of it, and we're pointing people in a particular way to rationalize that term, right? We're already pointing them in the same direction that we want them to go. So when you read it, that you read a term in articles from other authors, you know, question, is that the best term, or should there be a better term for that? Or, after you do all your readings, you start writing your dissertation, you realize there's no lexicon. A lexicon has to be created, right? That happens. So then, part of the originality for you in your dissertation is you create even a 10-word lexicon for a new domain, right? You become the guy, or the person, right? You become the scholar that has created the basic lexicon for a new, you know, if you're talking an interdisciplinary study most particularly, right? You come out with some new terminology or new term that's more appropriate, right? I mean, 15 years ago, nobody was saying followership in leadership, right? Until somebody came out and said, well, it's as important as to be a follower as it is to be a leader. We have leadership, we should have followership, right? And now followership is a term that's becoming known, but somebody had to create that term. Sometimes terms just come out because in conversation someone creates it and then it catches on. But at other times it's a scholar who says, here's a new term for this. And the reason why the term becomes useful is because it improves understanding of the phenomenon, right?
Two things. I just noticed this. Why is it like that?
That's my MSc in the Dutch system. It's a doctorandus. Yeah, so that's a Dutch degree, Dutch title. Yeah.
And then I've seen that you're using bibliography, not references.
No, there's references in the text, but there's always a bibliography. But for us, the bibliography is called bibliography. It's not called cited works or references or anything. The actual referencing in the text, where there's either a quote or an author's name, that's the reference. And then the references are included in the bibliography. And an important thing to remember is the bibliography only includes referenced materials. You can't, if you read something but you don't include it in your thesis, right, it is not going in the bibliography. Okay? Make sense? Okay. There was one more and then we're going to take a break.
At what stage?
He says it's new.
Pardon?
At what stage in your work?
Yeah, maybe before you put it in. Okay.
Because at least in my training, you find that when you try to come up with a new term, some of the challenges you and says, who are you?
Yeah, who are you?
So at what stage do you come up with this new term?
Why not? Why not? It's your doctoral dissertation. You want to create a new term, you create it. You got to justify why you're creating it, but you create it, you know. Hey, you're always going to have critics, right? So, yeah, my response to that is, if while you're doing the research, there's a valid reason that there should be a different term or another term being used in place of a first term, you know, then replace it. But give a logical reason why you think that's important. And you know what? Other people might read and go, this guy's got a really good point. We should start using this other term. Or that's a good, interesting term, and just create it. You might create a term and it goes nowhere. A new word or phenomenon, and nobody picks up on it. Okay.
One might be punished for using a new word that is not generally accepted as being equivalent of an existing block of knowledge, like already there. I remember what happened just 2 weeks ago. I entered into an examination. It has to do with legal issues, but these practical words were words of centuries past. At the level of the ILO, we have gone beyond that. That was at the country level. So I found myself reproducing that same law, using more modern expressions than what we have at the local level.
Yeah.
And I came back, I shouted, I said, see me trouble, I could be penalized by those who look at what I have done, believing that, oh, you did not use the exact words. But these exact words are no more used at the global level.
Yeah, but you're talking about laws. Yeah,
Yes.
that might be a little bit of a different issue dealing with there. Because in the legal profession, terms don't just, are not just definitions, they also have many implications on them, right? So, legal implications for punishment and things like this. Okay, let's take a break, we'll get some coffee and chocolate.